my gosh, did you say low temperatures?
Finally, right? We've waited months for this, right?
Yeah.
We'll talk about that forecast coming up, but welcome everyone. You're watching Weather Underground. I'm Mike Bettis.
I'm Alex Wilson. Dr. Nab off today, but he'll be back tomorrow, of course, as we are at the peak of the Atlantic hurricane season. And sure enough, we are still watching Hurricane Lee.
We are. It's been out there a while. It's going to still be out there all week long, but end of the week, into the weekend, that's when things get very, very real for us. And think about this. Even though we've only got like 2.5 months of the season left, still 57% of historic activity still remains in front of us, because September and October are very busy months in the Atlantic Basin.
Yeah, that's usually when we jam in all that activity. So as you pointed out, almost 60% of activity still yet to go, and this gives you credence to that, or gives that credence. We've got Margot, we've got Hurricane Lee, we've of course got another area to watch, another invest. So things are bumping in the Atlantic.
They are. Of course, Lee is grabbing all the headlines, right? We know that those of you, if you're living in New England, you need to be watching this one closely. Yeah, Lee, the kind of
impacts. We've got wind and we've got water. That is going to be a potential, even for places like Boston. So again, eastern sections of Massachusetts definitely in play for the impacts. You're going to see the increasing cloud cover, and perhaps, again, depending on the track of this, some heavy rain potential is there. All right, let's break it down for you. Again, looking at that coastal Maine, perhaps even a landfall. Don't want to rule anything out. Also, not setting anything in stone. There's still a lot more questions than answers with this, and that's why we've got the hurricane hunters out. We've got extra balloons going up, so we're getting all the weather information that we can to help make that forecast even better as we approach the end of the week and weekend. There, again, are our spaghetti models, all expecting Lee to take that northern turn, make its way off to the north. How far west does it get tugged? That's the million-dollar question at this point. A farther western path would mean strong winds, would mean heavy rain, would mean large waves and more coastal flooding, especially as we look into the New England states. But again, a farther westward track, even for northeast beaches, even for mid-Atlantic beaches, even for Carolina beaches, would have some effects. A farther eastward track would still mean moderate to large waves along the coast. So with this system increasing in size and still being a strong one, it can be well offshore, and we can still have problems in the water. Waves and rip currents, expect the danger to be high regardless of how far west or east this storm tracks. So if you've got beach plans later this week or into the upcoming weekend, you got to be aware of that. You got to listen to those lifeguards. Here's a look at wave height forecast as we move forward in time. There's the rip current danger as well. So even into our Florida beaches, Mike, those rip current dangers will be high, moderate along the South Carolina beaches. Watch as those large waves and rip currents begin to move in, even by midweek, late week now for the mid-Atlantic and parts of the Northeast. So really, Mike, nobody along the East Coast unscathed in terms of what's going to go on in the water.
I'm kind of hoping also that maybe cooler temperatures will mean.
Welcome back into Weather Channel. We are very closely watching Hurricane Lee, a storm that's going to be moving up along the coast of the U.S. How close it gets to the U.S. or not, of course, remains the million-dollar question at this point. It is a 120-mile-per-hour Category 3 hurricane at this point. So, yes, it has weakened. It continues, or it will continue to weaken, especially towards the end of the week. The thing is, it weakens, but it expands in size. And then we see even greater impacts still. So I don't want you to think, oh, the storm weakens, we're not going to have any problems. A larger system could mean more wide-reaching impacts. Pressure down to sub 950. We've got the storm moving northwest at 8 miles an hour. It is not moving very quickly, nor will it move very quickly as we go through the week. So be prepared to be hearing about Lee for some time. There is the forecast from the National Hurricane Center. Again, the cone tells us the expected path of the center of the storm. You can see impacts outside the cone, but a little westward shift with some of our forecast models. We're going to see what happens here in the future runs to see if we continue to bring that cone west or if we keep this storm well offshore. Even if it stays well offshore, you can expect the winds to kick up the surf, dangerous rip currents from Florida all the way to New England. And when we look at something like the European forecast, you can see those winds get awfully close, the center of the storm does too, to coastal sections of New England by the end of the week. Peak of the season, of course, right about now. And when we look at what we still have left with the season, about 57% of activity. So September and October remain very, very busy months in the Atlantic. It's what we've got right now. And no two hurricane seasons are the same. Our meteorologist Jen Carfagno explains why that's the case. of the U.S. Hurricane Lee, currently a 120-mile-per-hour Category 3 hurricane. It is moving northwest, 8 miles an hour, and that slow motion will continue. So you're hearing about Lee now. You're going to hear about Lee midweek. You're going to hear about Lee late week. We're going to be tracking this all week long as it continues that slow progression, eventually turning to the north. Right now, more northwestward motion. But again, that turn to the north, how close does it get to coastal sections of New England? Still uncertainty exists, but the potential is there. So if you live in these areas, you're going to want to be watching the forecast very closely and prepare. Make sure you're prepared. That way, if it does make a closer pass or a landfall, you're ready to go. Wave heights. Right now, we've seen those wave heights between 10 and 15 feet. And we're going to see those waves begin to increase along the coastal sections of Florida and the Carolinas as we move into the middle and especially the end part of the week. So coastal conditions are going to go downhill no matter where you are and no matter how close this storm gets. So expect large waves and dangerous rip currents, again, from Florida all the way up to coastal New England. The height of the impacts will be coming late week, again, as Lee continues that slow turn or that slow movement off to the north. As we look at what's happening across the mid-Atlantic, the Northeast, and the New England beaches, I think late week and the weekend will be the prime time for the ocean impacts. In terms of the wind and the rain impacts, too soon still to know exactly what level of impacts we're going to see out of Lee. But the latest run of the European model does bring the center of the storm much, much closer here to coastal sections of New England. So even a place like Boston could be looking at more significant winds. Portland, Maine as well. What to do in the meantime, and especially as we move into the late week and through the weekend, you want to swim only at guarded beaches, protect coastal structures, keep your travel plans flexible, be prepared for changes, make evacuation plans if you do live along the coast, and get supplies for you and others. Mike?
All very good advice, Alex.